Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and I had a viewer ask me, what do I think about the extreme stretching that Dante Trudel, the creator of Doggcrapp training, utilizes? Does it actually stretch muscle fascia out to make room for muscles to grow bigger? So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Talk about this in some detail. All right, for those not familiar with Doggcrapp training, Dante Trudel is a guy, gosh, I want to say what, 99, 2001, 2002, something like that, somewhere in that range. Came out with a system of training called Doggcrapp training as part of his Cycling for Pennies article. He used to tell guys how to utilize drugs and training to get as big as possible for as cheap as possible, basically. For guys who were really trying to get freakishly big. And he was a big believer in the basics and big, heavy barbell work with rest pause training for lots of reps. Did his system work? Yeah, it worked. I knew guys personally back when this came out who used it, and they got really big. It worked. His whole overall system worked. Not saying it's necessarily the best, but it does work. One element of what he did, though, was called extreme stretching, also known as muscle fascia stretching. And there are a couple of researchers who supported this, but one of them, he's not very credible. I'm not going to get into all that stuff with who that is and why he's considered not credible, because he's been caught biasing research and stuff in the past. But it did have some proponents in the exercise science world. The concept here is that by doing extreme amounts of stretching, with weights to a muscle when it's fully engorged, like it's pumped. So at the end of doing, it's like some rest pause training, you would basically use weights to stretch the muscle. What the idea is that some people have postulated that the muscle fascia around the muscle, the connective tissue at the ends of it, between it, that it's like a casing because it's this really fibrous tissue, that it's really tough tissue, that it limits muscle growth. And if you can stretch it out permanently by stretching it with weights, that you will give the muscles more room to grow faster. That was the idea behind it. Now, in practice, that really is a little bit ludicrous. It sounds good, but really, those fascia get micro tears in them all the time from training. They get tears in it. That's a normal part of training. In fact, when you feel DOMS and soreness in a muscle, that is always large amounts of muscle fascia tearing of the connective tissue. That's what actually causes that. It's not necessarily correlated with muscle growth, though. That's the thing. So the idea of stretching something that already gets micro tears in it from training, that's going to make some permanent change, probably not, because you need to remember, muscle fascia is living tissue also. And it is dynamic. It gets rebuilt and torn down and rebuilt all the time, just like all the other cells in your body. So stretching it probably isn't going to cause any sort of permanent stretch to it that's going to allow more growth. It's going to grow naturally, meaning if that was the case, then tons of guys don't do any fascia stretching, get absolutely enormous using drugs and everything else, absolutely enormous. Their muscles don't have trouble growing when either the training stimulus or the right hormonal environment is created for it. So the idea that that's going to help, it really isn't realistic, and it doesn't seem to be supported really by data that I can tell. However, the idea of extreme stretching contributing to muscle growth does actually come from somewhere. There is potentially something to that, and that comes from animal studies. It comes from animal studies, and what they've done with birds and mice and everything else is they have hung very large amounts of weight off of them. For prolonged periods of time. I'm talking days at a time. And when I mean a heavy weight, we're talking like a bird's wing having 2 times the bird's body weight being hung from it while the bird is in a cage, which is excruciatingly painful, by the way. And think about that. If your arm had double your body weight, let's say you weigh 180 pounds, you had 360 pounds attached to your arm and hung to it, pulling on it, left that way for a week straight while you're in a cell, that wouldn't make it through an ethics review board. Let's put it that way. It would be very, very painful. Very painful. What we have seen when that's done in animals, enormous amounts of muscle growth. Absolutely enormous amounts of muscle growth. What I mean enormous, more than weight training, more than steroids. So that's what we mean by enormous amounts. However, there seems to actually be hyperplasia going on. It's not about the muscle cells all getting bigger. It's about new muscle cells being created. It causes a proliferation of satellite cells, right? A proliferation of satellite cells. There have also been some drugs that have been linked to this. There are drugs, things like trenbolone, growth hormone, things like that used in heavy enough doses in animals have also induced hyperplasia. So we could speculate a potential synergy there for some enhanced athletes with the weighted stretching, but the intense stretching down on these animals seems to be a stimulator of new muscle cell growth. All right, not just necessarily the muscle cells themselves growing, which is what we're talking about. When you're talking about fascia stretching, the concept is that it will allow the individual muscle cell to get bigger, right? That's the concept. But when we do this extreme stretching in animals, it seems to be that it creates new muscle cells. So it's nothing to do with the fascia being stretched out. It has to do with this unique stretch stimulus causing the body to panic and produce new muscle cells just to prevent enormous injury. Again, it's never been tested in humans. We don't know what degree of muscle growth this sort of stuff would cause in human beings because it will never make it through an ethics review board unless we start performing cruel, unethical studies on human beings. You're not going to see research on this. It's just not going to happen, and I don't foresee that happening anytime soon, no matter what sort of changes in government we have in any Western country. I just don't see this happening in the name of studying how to gain muscle. And even if it did work, even if we studied it in prisoners or child molesters or murderers or whatever we wanted to study it in, who's going to do it in real life? No one's going to subject themselves to mind-numbing pain for weeks at a time trying to chase extra muscle gains. Like, no sane person's going to do that. Anyone who would willingly subject themselves to that is probably going to be found psychologically unfit to be out in society anyways. Just no way. And any guy who says they would, yeah, you're full of shit. It's one thing to talk about experiencing excruciating pain for 3 weeks straight intentionally. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually go through with it. So, not useful. But what Dante had people do was after they were pumped, because he was big on rest pause training, it would be doing stuff like taking your 10 to 12 rep max and doing rest pause reps with it until you could get up to 20 reps. You know, and he would say things like a guy who can squat 500 pounds for 20 reps is going to be big. A guy who can bench press 400 pounds for 20 reps is going to be big, even if it's all through rest pause to get there. I mean, and it makes sense. He's right. But you're also talking about using enormous amounts of drugs in conjunction with that, which is a big part of the ticket there. But he would have people do their rest pause training because they only do one set under his system. And then they would do weighted stretches afterwards. So then, let's say after you train your triceps, you would do a weighted stretch. You might grab a 40 or 50 pound dumbbell in your hand and stretch your tricep behind it while it was pumped and engorged with blood, so that you stretch it even further because there's more mechanical tension in there, hydraulic pressure due to the blood in there. So you stretch it even more due to it being engorged with blood. All right, that causes more stretch. So you stretch it with weights. You do your chest with, flies. Biceps, with incline curls all the way down at a really, really low angle. So you would do extreme stretching after you were pumped for as long as you could stand it. And it generally hurts. If you do this, what he's doing, it is painful. And it's not comfortable. It's nowhere near the level of pain these other experiments would induce, but it's painful. Now, the question becomes, does it work? I don't know. We don't have studies on this low level of stretching for short periods of time to tell us if it really works. But we could speculate that because he had people doing this while on pretty hefty doses of drugs, some of those drugs are ones that were linked to hyperplasia in animal studies, all right? Like trenbolone, perfect example. If people were utilizing these substances and combining this stretch overload training along with already, rest pause training is brutally effective for muscle growth, by the way. It is actually a very effective method. There have been studies done on rest pause training showing that one set of rest pause training induces as much muscle growth as taking like 3 sets to failure. Like on a squat or a bench press or something, doing 3 sets to failure with 10 reps produce the same muscle growth that doing one rest pause set does, getting up to 20 reps. So I've seen at least one study showing that when it has been studied. So there is something to it. It is a very effective growth method. You combine that with this weighted stretching. Could this weighted stretching induce further satellite cell proliferation? from some of these people already on drugs, yeah, there could be a synergy there. There could be a synergy there. I wouldn't rule it out. Is it necessarily going to work on drug-free people? I don't know. That's really hard to tell. But what I do know is that it hurts. A lot of people aren't going to want to necessarily do it for maybe gains. But what I would say with something like that, I don't think it's necessarily going to hurt your gains either. So if someone wanted to try it and see how much it helped over time, you may not even notice if it helps, because a lot of things you do for muscle growth are so small that you don't notice the changes. But if someone doesn't mind enduring it, taking the time to do it, if they want to do it, it's experimental, it's hypothetical, but it might work. It could be worth doing. Could people who are using a lot of anabolics and stuff do this? Probably. But I might also suggest those same people do a lot of stretch reflex exercises. Exercises that induce a stretch reflex as well, because that might have a synergistic effect also with what they're doing. But as far as it working or not, really, we don't know. It's too hard to say. It falls into that gray area of maybe. There needs to be more research done on it. But the thing is it more going to work better than just traditional effective weight training? Probably not. Who knows? But I keep that one in the area of maybe it might work. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.